All right, continuing on in Fantasy Football 2013, I'm Brett Norton. Today we're going to look at the Carolina Panthers, and for the first time I can honestly say draft a quarterback. Cam Newton is a terrific quarterback. You do have to realize his value is all, as far as fantasy, due to the run. This is a guy who threw for 800 fewer yards than Peyton Manning did last year. He threw 18 fewer touchdowns. He threw more interceptions. But he ran for 750 yards, and he ran for 8 touchdowns. And you have to understand that's where his value is, because that gave him more fantasy points than Peyton Manning had. If Newton goes down to a more standard quarterback number, even a running quarterback, and averages about 550 yards rushing and 5 touchdowns, his fantasy value is significantly diminished. So as much as I like Cam Newton, and he is a valuable commodity and someone that should be drafted, you have to understand he's going in the late second, early third round category. You can get someone like Peyton Manning or even RG3 who will put up pretty similar numbers to his 20, 30, 40 picks down the road. So understand that Newton, from a fantasy perspective, as great a quarterback as he is overrated right now, and you might be better off letting someone else take him. If you can get him in round 4, I wouldn't do it myself, simply because quarterbacks are such a commodity after just a couple. But he certainly is draft worthy, and again, late in round 4, which I don't think you have a chance of getting him, would be an absolute steal. Running backs are Jonathan Stewart and D'Angelo Williams. The two-headed monster for Carolina continues. Williams probably a little bit more value. He seems to be healthier a little bit more often. Stewart's a decent runner. Neither one's exciting running back. Newton runs for more touchdowns than they do, and that's always the problem with the Carolina running game. Although there seems to be more of a commitment in Carolina this year to the run, so look for Stewart and Williams to have more fantasy value that way. Wide receivers, Steve Smith, a solid number 1. He falls into that back half of number 1 or a wide receiver 2 category. He didn't catch many touchdowns last year, and even the year before only caught 7. So he's certainly not in the Dez Bryant, Calvin Johnson category, but he's far ahead of the Greg Littles of the world as well. So Steve Smith, worthy of being taken. Look for him in round, say, 5, maybe 6, as a solid wide receiver 1. No other receiver for Carolina is worthy of consideration. They've got Brandon LaFell on the other side, and he hasn't done much in his time in the league. At tight end, you've got Greg Olsen. Olsen, a top 5 tight end, but usually after the top 2, tight end is such a commodity, you just kind of grab whichever one you want in rounds 9, 10, 11. And you'll end up with a solid tight end, but it's more of a position that you want to have a guy for certain matchups in certain games and not just rely on them week in and week out. And the same is true with Greg Olsen. But again, he falls in that 4 or 5 category in the top 5 tight ends. Defense for the Panthers should be very solid, as should the special teams. They've got Ted Ginn and Dominic Hickson, who they brought over as well. Both those guys can return kicks. Ginn is a solid return man, certainly a better returner than he is a wide receiver. And the defense should be solid. Again, they're not a top 12. They are a top 12 defense, probably closer to 8 or 9 as far as fantasy value goes. Kicking game is solid, but not spectacular with Carolina. Now, they'll score more points than some of the other teams we've already talked about, so that limits the viability of their kickers. And I don't think they're going to kick as many long field goals, which is why if you get a Greg Zuerlein of the Rams, that's where his value is, that he has such a strong leg. He can kick 50, 60-yard field goals, and they're going to get bogged down a little bit more than Carolina is. So again, looking at the fantasy perspectives for the Carolina Panthers, Cam Newton, Certainly draft worthy and certainly a draft early candidate, but just be careful that he is overvalued right now in early mock drafts. Jonathan Stewart, D'Angelo Williams at running backs, they're both okay, but neither one's spectacular. Steve Smith should be one of the first wide receivers off the board, somewhere in that round 5 or 6. And Greg Olsen at tight end is certainly a worthy candidate of being drafted as well. Just beware that he is one of those guys, like a lot of other tight ends, that kind of falls into the pool of good but not great. Defense is certainly worthy of consideration for drafting as well. Wouldn't worry too much about the kicking game for the Panthers.